Have all come in. So welcome everybody. We are so glad to have you all join us today. Welcome to our webinar on delivering a digital first public experience, part of our Federal Communicators series. This is the first of our series in 2024, and we are very excited to kick it off with our guest, Jonathan Finch, the Acting Director of Digital Experience. I'm Mark Lerner. I'm the Director for Technology and Innovation here at the Partnership for Public Service. For folks that this is the first time joining a partnership event, welcome in. Partnership is very glad to be an organization that works with federal leaders and staff, all like yourselves, that are working to build a better government and a stronger democracy. And I'm personally excited to talk about digital experience because I think it's such a critical lens to look at our engagement with the public. The public's expectations of government, just like any organization that they have been engaging with, has irreversibly changed and will continue to change in this digital era. A core part of our service to the public is meeting them where they are and evolving to meet their needs and delivering on our missions. And I see this memo, which I've got my printed and annotated copy right here, and this broader effort as well that includes programs like the US Web Design System, the Digital Analytics Program, both of which we'll hear a little bit more about, as a milestone in our journey to ultimately communicating effectively and efficiently with the public that we serve. To that end, I'm very excited to hear from, and it's my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Finch, the Acting Director of Digital Experience within the White House Office of Management and Budget. Jonathan helped draft and now leads the government-wide implementation of OMB's flagship policy on delivering a digital-first public experience. Jonathan serves as an implementation lead for the customer experience priority area of the President's management agenda. Throughout his career, which has spanned both the private and public sectors, Jonathan has helped organizations of all sizes rethink how they engage with and serve their customers. Prior to joining government, Jonathan worked at Deloitte Consulting, where he served as an advisor to C-suite executives on a range of topics. Jonathan holds a Master's of Public Policy degree from Georgetown University and began his career in public service as a White House intern while at Georgetown. Jonathan, it's a pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark, for the introduction, and to you and the team for the invitation to join today. Really excited to be with this group to talk a little bit more about the guidance, and I think more importantly, talk about how we hope the folks on this call can really plug in and help us realize the vision that I think this guidance sets. I'll give a bit of a brief presentation on the why, the what, and the how for the guidance itself, and then would be happy to take any questions that folks may have at the end. And I'll just say, for folks who, like Mark, have printed the document out and read it many times, some of what I'm going to say is probably familiar, but that's okay. I hope you've come ready to ask me plenty of questions about the guidance. And then also for folks who maybe this is a bit newer to, I hope that this will be helpful context and will spur some questions as we get through the presentation. So with that, let's go ahead and bring up the slides and we'll jump right in. All right, we can hop to the next one here. Okay, so I imagine I might be preaching to the choir here, but I do want to start with the why, and specifically why, from our team's perspective, from the administration's perspective, this policy and more broadly, like Mark mentioned, this work is so critically important. And it's really about equal parts, meeting statutory requirements. The guidance itself stems from the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But we use this as an opportunity to think a bit more than just about how do we meet the expectations of the law, but more so how do we meet user needs. And as far as those needs go, we know that digital is increasingly the default way that the public interacts with government. Nearly 2 billion visits to federal websites each month, over half of which are mobile devices and are on mobile devices. And we know that these numbers are only going to increase. So there's just such a clear signal and a need that we have to be able to interact with the public digitally. Next slide. And we also have data to suggest that that is in fact how much of the public prefers to interact through government. This is the data on this slide is from a survey that was conducted by an external party last year, and you can see that the digital channels are the ones where there is a clear preference from the public. They want digital options when interacting with government. I'll say, and I do want to make this point very clearly. There of course will continue to be those who prefer to have in-person or over the phone interactions, and we do want to make sure that we're maintaining those channels. But again, the demand for digital options is clear, and as the name of the guidance itself states, the goal here is digital first, but it is not necessarily digital only. Next slide. Okay, so I want to use a couple slides here to just talk about where we're at today, and specifically a couple examples to hopefully land some of the main points here. So what's here, I'm sure, is familiar to folks. You may have experienced this in your professional work. You may have experienced this as a member of the public yourself. But this is just one example of what a member of the public might see when searching online for government services. Specifically, an example of how to apply for Medicare. But again, you can imagine a similar result for just about any question about any government agency, regulation, or service. And what you'll see is that the information, it's scattered across multiple websites. There's potentially government websites competing with information from third-party websites. And in some cases, it might not even be that easy to tell the difference between what is a government source versus what is a non-government source. And what this ultimately leads to is getting to the best or the right source of information can be quite challenging. Next slide. So that was for search, but even when you are able to get to, let's say, the best or the right website, navigating the federal website itself can be quite challenging. The pages here are the home pages for the 6 most visited federal websites, and you'll notice that they're all different, with different menus, different layouts, and different placement of tools. And I'll say many of the examples shown here have actually been recently redesigned and offer fantastic functionality. And if there are folks on this call who have contributed to these sites, so much incredible work has been done, but we're still lacking that aspect of consistency across sites. And that's something that the guidance really does strive to address and to drive some change around. Next slide. Okay, a couple more figures that I think, again, get at what we're trying to solve for here and where we hope to see some movement. So in addition to the challenges that I just talked about in terms of searching for government information, navigating government websites, we also know that in many cases, our federal websites today are simply not collectively meeting the public's needs and more so the public's expectations. So about 60% of federal websites have some type of detectable accessibility issue, meaning that they might not be accessible to all people. Almost half of federal websites are not currently mobile friendly. And as I mentioned at the outset, we see more and more traffic occurring through mobile devices. And so when we talk about how do we measure digital experience and progress on digital experience across the federal government, these are the types of numbers that we want to see some movement on. Next slide. All right, and then lastly, that was kind of the focus on what is already digital. But of course, on the topic of forms, there's a lot of room for improvement here, and the current state landscape is putting a lot of burden on the public. I won't go through each stat. I think that the one that seems to get the most attention is the fact that only 2% of federal government forms have been fully digitized to date. Of course, there is certainly a long tail of government forms that drives this number, but nonetheless, a significant opportunity to think about what are the forms that a lot of the public is relying on for access to critical information, benefits, and services, and how can we think about better digitizing those and making it easier to access and complete those forms. Next slide. All right, so that was a lot about the why and where we're at. This is really about where we want to go. And for folks who have joined other public events from our office or really from any member of the administration talking about customer experience, you've likely seen this tagline: simple, seamless, secure. That is fundamentally what we are driving towards, and that's the vision that we hope this guidance, alongside a number of other efforts across the administration, are helping us to get closer to. Next slide. Okay, so that was where we're trying to go. Now I want to shift the conversation to how are we going to get there, and specifically talk about the role that we hope our guidance will play in that journey. But before I talk about the guidance, just want to quickly touch on the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act itself, passed back in 2018, and was really the foundation for what our guidance set out to do. I won't read through each of these, but the law itself articulated these 5 areas for to lay out the ways in which agencies are meant to deliver an integrated digital experience. And for the folks who have had a chance to look through our guidance, you'll see that the guidance itself is organized around these same pillars, and in many ways is meant to provide additional specificity on how agencies can and should be implementing the vision that the law itself set out. Next slide. So that was the law. Let me now talk a little bit about the guidance. And again, the guidance in many ways builds on the law and really sets a number of standards for what a digital-first public experience should look and should feel like. There's a lot to it. The guidance document itself is about 30 pages long. So for the folks who have gone through it, appreciate you spending some time to get into the weeds with us. But I want to decompose it a little bit and talk about it in terms of the 7 pillars that are shown here, because we believe that ultimately the guidance in its many aspects boil down to driving change across each of these 7 areas. And I'll just briefly talk through each, and then would certainly welcome questions from folks at the end if it would be helpful to get into more detail. So first, on analytics, we can't manage what we can't measure. And this guidance reinforces what was already a requirement to participate in the Digital Analytics Program, a free web analytics program provided by the General Services Administration. On accessibility, it reinforces adherence to Section 508 standards and other globally recognized guidelines. On brand, reinforces the requirement to use a government domain, a .gov, a .mil domain for all official communications. And it also calls for the application of more consistent agency branding, both of which are really critical ways and levers to ensure that we are building trust in our interactions with the public. On content, it reinforces a number of existing rules around plain language guidelines. And it also calls for agencies to take steps to consolidate or remove duplicative content, both within a given agency, but perhaps more importantly, across agencies. On design, Mark mentioned this at the outset, but it calls for the use of the US Web Design System, another free offering provided by GSA, as a way and really a tool to help deliver more consistent, more user-friendly websites. On search, reinforces a requirement around having on-site search to help folks navigate within a given website. And it also includes quite a bit of detail around certain SEO-related best practices to make it easier for folks to find content and the right information when using third-party search engines. And then lastly, digitization, none of these other pillars really matter if we are not able to offer something in a digital format. And so the guidance calls for digital options to complete and sign forms, and then also really pushes on thinking about where can you make those options as self-service as possible, especially for common tasks that we know a lot of the public needs to complete on a recurring basis. So a lot to it, a lot on this slide. I'll say a lot of this isn't necessarily new by any means. A lot of this is best practices that we've seen used to success in pockets across the federal government. But the key here and what we are hoping to drive through the ongoing implementation of the guidance is really ensuring that we're delivering against each and every one of these pillars. And perhaps most importantly, we're doing so more consistently, both within and then across agencies. Next slide. All right, so we're starting to get towards the end here. I want to just briefly touch on where we're at in implementation and what comes next. The guidance itself was released last September, so we're coming up on the 6-month anniversary in about a month or so here, and we've already made some really exciting progress in terms of the actions that were included in the guidance. Number of actions, the ones that are shown here are those that were specifically required for agencies to complete within the first 6 to 12 months. And the goal here is really to help agencies and the teams that are doing this work to build a strong foundation for implementation. Of course, we want there to be as much progress on improving websites, improving digital services, and other digital channels as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that we're taking steps now to build a strong foundation that will set this work up for success in the long term. And so the first action around identifying a digital experience delivery lead, agencies have already done this, and the aim here was really to drive some accountability and to make sure that there was somebody at each agency positioned to drive the right type of coordination across the various functions and the various teams that are critical to supporting this work. Secondly, around identifying public-facing websites, recently completed as of about a month or so ago. And the aim here was really to help us figure out what is the right baseline, and then from there, it enables us to do a lot of really exciting measurement around progress on all of the pillars that I just mentioned on the last slide. We're currently in the process of having agencies assess and collect traffic data for each of these identified public-facing websites, which will be really important to help enable prioritization and help figure out where there might be some opportunities to press on in the near term. And then lastly, once that wraps up, we'll be asking agencies to do some assessment around their common and top web content, as well as their top tasks, and both of which the actions are really focused on helping to reveal where there might be meaningful and achievable opportunities to drive digital experience improvement. Next slide. Okay, so that was the agency action piece of the guidance itself. I also want to talk briefly about some of the actions that we're taking across government and really in close collaboration with our partners at GSA and a number of other key implementation partners. And the idea here is that where there is a common need across agencies, we're trying to figure out how can we develop and deliver that at the central level so that agencies have the standards and the tools and the other resources that they need to enable and perhaps more importantly, accelerate delivery. So the first one here, digital.gov, it's been positioned and will continue to serve as the home for implementation resources for this guidance and for digital experience more generally. Would highly encourage folks who haven't been on the site recently to go give it a look. The team has made some really exciting improvements to make it easier to find helpful information, helpful guides. And this is something that will, of course, continue to update as we move forward. We'll also shortly launch a new digital experience council, which will serve as the primary interagency body for this work. I mentioned earlier a couple times the importance of thinking about how do we deliver improvement across agencies, and this council will certainly be a key tool in helping us do that. We're also in the process of updating federal website standards, which will provide even more specificity on which aspects of web pages should be standardized across government. Again, going back to the 6 examples that I showed earlier. But at the same time, realizing that perhaps some portions of websites need to be flexible in terms of requirements so that agencies can design and organize them in ways that align with their needs and with their mission. Plain language is similar to standards. We're in the process of updating plain language guidelines to ensure that they reflect the latest and the best thinking on how to write in plain language for various audience types. And then lastly, certainly procurement is a huge part of this, and a lot of the work that is happening across agencies in this space certainly involves the use of external vendors and external tools, and we're taking a number of steps to improve procurement processes. One, by facilitating industry engagement and making sure that they're at the table and clear on how they can help and support agencies in this effort. And then also just thinking about what are the other actions that we can take to make it easier for agencies to buy digital solutions and services. So a lot more to come on government-wide actions, but again, the focus here is on just thinking through what can we do centrally to make it as easy as possible for our agency partners to successfully implement the many pillars that the guidance includes. Next slide. All right, I think this is the second to last one here, and I wanted to talk specifically, about this group, so our federal communicators, and how this group can support this vision and this work. And this perhaps sounds simple, but I think that the best way to do so is to just proactively and regularly assess the content that you're building, assess the content that you're putting out in front of the public. And this is something that we are actually asking our agency partners to do as part of the action I mentioned earlier around common questions. But this is certainly something that anyone who touches public-facing content can do on their own. And it really just starts with trying to figure out what are the common questions that the public has about your agency, about your program, about the specific service area that you're working in. And once you generate that, drop them in their search engine and just see what the public is seeing when they're trying to get their questions answered or trying to learn a bit more about your agency, your program, your service. And then lastly, consider looking at those results. Are there duplicative results? Are there more than one government sources that are providing similar and perhaps conflicting information? Likewise, is anything outdated? There's constant movement in terms of eligibility rules, enrollment processes. Is anything that is being surfaced by the search engine perhaps not what you want the public to be looking at? Likewise, ranking, right? Is it too low? Is it buried behind other search results such that the best answer is not what the member of the public might be most likely to click on? is it relevant, right? Potentially there might be a common question that surfaces a number of results, but none of them are really getting at the heart of what that member of the public is asking. And then lastly, and I mentioned this in the example I showed at the outset around search results, but are there competing non-government sources where a third party is putting forth information that perhaps is competing and confusing to users when comparing it with a government source? And so all of these things, both individually and then certainly collectively, are the types of opportunities that we want to identify, and we want to think about what actions can we take to improve the content and to make it easier for the public to find what they're looking for. And I'll just close by saying, in the guidance, this is a one-time activity. It's a one-time requirement, but our hope is very much that this isn't just a one-time activity, but rather a routine process that happens far more frequently across government. We know it's happening in places, but we would love to see it done much more frequently across the board. And back to how I teed up this slide, that's really where you and your peers can play a big role and can play a really helpful role in making that a reality. Next slide. Okay, so this is the last slide, and then I will turn it back to Mark for questions. Just wanted to leave folks with a couple of places to go to learn more. If you haven't done so yet, would highly encourage you to go to whitehouse.gov, review the fact sheet for this guidance. It includes a lot of what I covered today, but also includes a bit more on the scope and magnitude of the opportunity that we have in the digital experience space. I mentioned digital.gov earlier. I will again harp on it. Ton of great content, ton of great resources. You can go visit to learn more about the digital analytics program, the design system, and a lot of the other shared services that we're actively collaborating with our partners at GSA on. You can also join a community of practice. There are a bunch of communities of practices related to this work, including one focused on communicators. And then lastly, for digital.gov, just a quick plug, the team is hosting a community-wide summit coming up on March 13th. You can find more details on the website, but that will be another fantastic opportunity for folks who are working in this space to come together and to hear from folks from our office and a number of the other offices who are working on this effort. And then lastly, we haven't talked a ton about budget in the presentation so far, but would certainly encourage folks to go to cao.gov, and in particular, do some exploring around the Technology Modernization Fund. And in particular, there are a number of ways in which the TMF is being deployed to support this work. There's an allocation of funds specifically for customer experience related projects. And there's also a streamlined application process specifically for projects that align with this work. So another great tool and one that I would certainly encourage folks to do some exploring around. So with that, that's it for the presentation. I know I went through things pretty quickly, but I just wanted to give the group some context. And then, certainly, like I mentioned, would be happy to get into questions. So with that, I'll wrap up and I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was really phenomenal to see all pulled into one view. I think that you did a great job of summarizing what is a monumental and complex also set of new practices that I think is going to be really important and really transformative for how we serve the public.